Now that you're familiar with the session view, let's have a look at the arrangement view. Just a reminder that you can use the tab button to toggle between the session view and arrangement view. And when you're looking at a track in either of the views, you can press Shift Tab to toggle between the device and detail view. So as I mentioned before, these tracks are connected, so they're actually the same tracks between each of those views. And all of the commands that you would typically use in either of these views will apply to both of the views. So you can rename almost anything in Ableton Live by clicking on the item that you'd like to rename, and you can press Command R on a Mac or Control R on a PC to access rename mode. So you'll notice that the name of this track that I have selected here has become highlighted, and now I can add any type of name. So let's say track 1. Now after I'm finished inputting a name, I have the option to finalize the name by pressing the return or the enter key on my keyboard, which will make it look like this. Or I can press tab on my keyboard to tab down to the next track without leaving the rename mode. This makes it really easy to name a bunch of tracks in sequence so that you don't have to click all over the place. Here we go, track 3, just so that you can see this. Track 4. Let's say I made a mistake that I noticed on a previous track and I'd like to move up to that track without exiting rename mode. I can press Shift and Tab to move backwards in my selection. So once more, it's Tab to jump down and Shift Tab to move upward in rename mode. Once I'm done, I can press Enter or Return on my keyboard. And just so you know, you can do this exact same thing in the session view, and I'll show you how that looks. Tab, 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 Shift, Tab, Tab, Tab to move back. Enter, and then we'll tab over to the arrangement view after I've exited the rename mode. Now all of these tracks can be recolored any way you want. You just have to right-click on the colored portion of the track and you'll get a nice selection of colors in your context menu that you can choose from. So let's say I want to add a new MIDI clip. Last time I was using the analogy of using a player piano with those rolls of paper. In this case, we're going to create a MIDI clip that will be the length of our beat that we're going to make, or the melody, or what have you. To do that, you can just create a time selection inside of the grid where you'd like the MIDI clip to be placed. Just make sure that you're actually doing this on a MIDI track, because you won't be able to do this on an audio track. So once you've created that time selection, you can either right-click on the selection and choose Insert Empty MIDI Clip from the context menu, or you can use the keyboard shortcut Shift-Command-M on a Mac, or Shift-Control-M on a PC. Now you'll notice that the clip that gets placed there is the same color as our track. You're able to change the color of any of these clips, depending on your application. You can also name the clip too by just clicking on the clip handle, which is this upper portion of that clip. Entering rename mode by pressing Command R on a Mac or Control R on a PC, and then you can name this clip anything you'd like. Nice. Let's say we want to assign the track color to all of the clips that are in our timeline. If we were to do this manually, say if we had a bunch of different colored clips in our timeline, and for some reason we decided that we just wanted to switch them all to the same color as our track, we can just right-click on the track color and go right down to the bottom of the context menu and choose Assign Track Color to Clips. So you may have noticed that I had quickly duplicated this clip, and I'm going to tell you how you can do that. Anytime you're duplicating something back to back, just like editing MIDI, you can press Command D, and that's going to duplicate that clip. Of course, on a PC, it's Control D. On a Mac, it's Command D. When you're manipulating clips in the timeline, you can do so by selecting the clip and then applying some type of keyboard shortcut. There's something to be aware of here when we're looking at a clip. Just as I mentioned before, the upper portion of the clip is, I like to call it the clip handle. It's kind of like if you're moving a briefcase around. the top of the clip is the handle of the briefcase. You can click there to move the clip left and right. If you were to click below the clip handle, you'll notice that the icon changes to the arrow, and you're no longer able to move that clip. However, you are able to create a time selection inside of that clip. This opens up big opportunities to edit that clip in specific ways. For example, if I created a time selection inside of this clip and then used the keyboard shortcut Command D to duplicate, it would duplicate the selection that I had made. I'll just undo that using Command Z or Control Z on a PC. Alternatively, if I want to split this clip into 3 separate parts, instead of using Command D to duplicate, I can press Command E to split. Command E to split. On a PC, of course, that's Control E. Control E. I'm repeating that one because it's a really important one, and you're able to use this to manipulate any of the clips that you have on your timeline, whether it's a MIDI clip or an audio clip. If you don't want to create 2 slice points, you can always just click in the lower half of that clip below the clip handle, and you can use Command E or Control E on a PC to just add that slice point. It might be a little bit difficult to see where the slice point is depending on the color of your clip and your view settings in Ableton, but just look at the upper portion of the clip to see the title. Right here it's kind of truncated, indicating that these are just 2 little clips here. But you can always click on the upper portion of the clip just to verify. So let's say we want to join clips together. Let's say I've added these clips in here, I've split them, and maybe I want to combine them. What I can do is create a time selection by clicking on the rightmost or leftmost clip handle, and then hold Shift and click on the leftmost handle, the opposite side of the selection range that I'm hoping for. That's going to create a selection between both of those selection points. And then to consolidate this clip, to join all the clips together, you can use the keyboard shortcut Command J on a Mac or Control J on a PC. That's going to combine all of these pieces together into one clip. Let me show you how that looks in the detail view if we're combining different clip pieces. So I'm just going to enter this first clip here. I'm going to give it a different color. I'll give it green. And so I'll double click on it. That's going to show me down in the bottom area here that I am currently editing the green clip number 1. I'll just randomly add some notes in here so that we can see some differentiation between this clip and the rest of the clips. Alright, and you'll notice that as I'm adding these MIDI notes into the clip, a unique feature of the arrangement view is that you get to see a small preview of the MIDI notes that are inside of that clip. This gives you a nice overview, especially if you're creating a pretty big track with slight variations of different types of clips. You'll be able to detect that there's a change in those MIDI clips just by kind of looking at the shape of the pattern in that little overview area. Okay, maybe I'll edit this clip here and I'll give it a different color, purple. And again, I'm just going to randomly choose some notes here. There we go. Now I'm going to join all of these clips together to create one really big clip that contains the combination of both of these MIDI sections. So I'm going to click on the clip handle of the left clip, hold Shift, and click on the clip handle of the right clip, and then choose Command J to join. You'll notice that now I've got one big MIDI clip that's taken on the color of the first clip in our selection, and the MIDI information that was in both of the clips is now available to view inside of the MIDI editor. If I want to move this clip around or copy it or paste it, you can use any of your normal word processing commands. So on a Mac, it's Command C to copy and Command V to paste. On a PC, it's Control C to copy and Control V to paste. If I want to cut a clip, I can use Command X on a Mac or Control X on a PC. and that's removed the clip from the timeline, but it saved it to what's called a clipboard. That's sort of quick access memory where you'll be able to save that one item and paste it somewhere else. Now you can paste this by using, of course, Command V, and you can paste anywhere there's another MIDI track. So I can paste along the MIDI track that I'm currently using, or if I wanted to, I could actually paste this onto the MIDI track that's below. Just like pretty much any of the selection options, either in the MIDI editor or in the timeline, if you need to create a very specific time selection and you prefer to click and drag, you can do so by clicking and dragging in the lower portion of your timeline. You can click in the upper portion in an area of the timeline where there currently isn't a clip occupying that space, but I recommend getting into the habit of just clicking the lower portion, just so that you can avoid the possibility of accidentally moving a clip around and not noticing as you're creating a time selection. If you're working in a fairly large project and you want to move the tracks around so that they're in a different order, you can actually do that by just clicking the track and dragging it up or down. I'm going to just recolor these so that you can get a better view of what happens as I kind of reshuffle these tracks. So you can see that maybe I've got the green one up at the top, and maybe I'd like to move it down at the bottom so that maybe track 1 and track 2 are available right next to one another. This is important if I want to do something like put these tracks in some type of a group. To group tracks, you can create a selection. So maybe I would like to select all 4 of these tracks from the purple track all the way to the brown track. I can click on the top track, hold Shift, and click on the bottom of the range. So the bottom of the selection that I'd like to make. That will select the entire range between my click points, and that will allow me to apply some type of a keyboard shortcut or command to this selection. If I want to select non-adjacent tracks, I can click on a track, hold Command on a Mac, and click on another track while skipping one in the middle. If I'm on a PC, I can use the Control button. So now that I've got these 2 tracks selected, let's learn how to put these tracks into a group, or you could also say putting them into a bus. So I've got them selected, and I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Command G to group. That's going to place them into this bracket here. Alternatively, if you have a coffee in your hand or you just don't feel like doing a keyboard shortcut, you can right-click on your selection and you can choose Group Tracks from the context menu. Now you'll notice that this group has a default name, One Group, and you can rename this just like any of your tracks by using the rename function, Command R or Control R on a PC. I'm just going to call this Test Group 1. Nice. I might use this group for an application such as a collection of drum sounds. If I have maybe 4 tracks in my group, and I've got maybe a kick drum, a snare drum, hat, and maybe a crash, I can keep these all bundled into one group called drums, and if I use this button next to the title drums, I can fold this track down and keep it nice and tidy. Now the thing about putting tracks into a group is that it changes the audio routing. This is important because it acts as, like I had mentioned before, a bus. So if you're concerned about your CPU usage, or you'd like to just process multiple tracks in the same way, you can place them in a bus, and now if you add any audio effects or devices to the group track, it's going to apply the effect to all of the sounds that are inside of that group. Let me demonstrate what I mean. So first off, on the left-hand side in the browser, we've already explored the drums area where it has a selection of instruments, drum instruments. We also have this instrument tab where we can select some additional instruments, whether it's a synthesizer or some type of a sampler device. Under the audio effects is where we're going to be provided a list of all of the ways that we can manipulate the audio coming through the channels. Below that we have MIDI effects, Max for Live is a really cool way that users can create their own custom audio effects using a visual programming language. Plugins is where you'll find all of your third-party plugins that you may have purchased and installed on your computer. Clips is a selection of all of the Ableton Live clips, or ALC files, which are a combination of either MIDI information, audio information, plus audio devices and MIDI devices. You'll also find a category for samples, which is just a collection of all of the audio samples that you've used or that are in your user library or located inside of any of the sessions that you've opened in the past. Grooves allows you to choose velocity and timing grooves that you can apply to any of the MIDI clips or audio clips in your session. We'll go into greater detail, of course, for all of these categories in later videos. The very last category here is templates, where you can create and add different types of default templates that you can quickly queue up just to kind of streamline your process a little bit. Right now I've selected the default live set so that it's a little bit easier for you to see the relation between what you're viewing in this course and what you currently have on your screen when you load up Ableton Live for the first time. Underneath this is the packs area, where you can download all of the Ableton Live packs from abletonlive.com. I have basically all of them downloaded. Under this is the user library. We're going to dive into this in more detail in a moment when we install your user library elements template. Underneath the user library, you get to see the current projects folder. This is just going to show you any of the audio samples that are currently inside of your project folder. And we'll go into more detail about that in a moment. Under this, you have the ability to add a custom folder. You can see that I've currently added my music stuff folder, and as I work with you in person via Zoom, I'll help you install a custom music stuff folder so that you can keep all of your songs and sessions organized. Okay, let's get back to it. So we were talking about applying an audio effect to the drum group or the drum bus. So under the audio effects tab, we have all of these categories: delay and loop, drive and color, dynamics, EQ and filters, modulators, pitch and modulators, reverb and resonance, and utilities. So I'm gonna choose one of these reverb and resonance options. The hybrid reverb is a nice mixture between a realistic impulse reverb and a synthesized reverb. And so I'm gonna just grab this and apply it to my group. Now remember, just like adding a drum instrument or some instrument device to any of your tracks, you have a few ways that you can add the device. And there is a preferred way to add that device. So the preferred way is to drag the device onto the track of your choice. You can click on the track that you'd like to add the device to, and then you can double click on the device that you'd like to add. But just remember that, especially when you're using an instrument device, if you're in the habit of double clicking instruments, you might accidentally overwrite the instrument patch that you currently had on that track, and maybe you had already put in quite a few minutes of tweaking in order to dial that sound in perfectly, and I wouldn't want you to lose your work and to slow down your workflow. So I highly recommend that you get into the habit of clicking and dragging the devices that you'd like in your set, just until you get really familiar with the Ableton Live interface. So now you can see that on the drums group, we have one device in the device chain. You can see the devices in each one of the track's device chains by just clicking on the title bar of the track itself. Right now, I don't have any instruments or devices on these tracks, so you won't see anything in the device view. But let's add something in here so that it makes it a little bit easier for you to see. So we need some sort of a kick sample. So I think I'm going to trigger a single kick audio file using the simpler device. To do this, I can jump over to the instruments area and find the simpler device and drag that onto the kick track. So it appears that I have my simpler device set to load this bass F wonk sound by default, but when you load the simpler device, you might see just a black screen in the display. It might say add a sample here. So what we're going to do is search in the browser now. I'm going to use Command F on my keyboard. For PC, you can use Control F, and this is going to switch me to the All Results search function, where when I type in kick, it's going to search through all of the files that I have on my computer and present them in a list. Let's look through some of these kick sounds. We'll just find something that is pretty basic. That'll do the trick. I'm going to add this kick sound to my sampler device by dragging it into the display. And you'll notice that the sample waveform has changed. Now, there is a faster way to do this that I'll show you. If you have a track that doesn't have an instrument on it, you can actually just grab the sample that you like to have on that track and drag it right into the device area. That will automatically add that sample inside of a simpler device. So let's have a look at this. The MIDI information is a little bit wonky, so it'll probably sound kind of bad, but that's okay. Maybe I'll just quickly edit this into something that's a bit more standard. I'll switch this to quarter notes by using Command 2 on my Mac, Control 2 on a PC, and I'm just going to add some kick drums here. There we go. So you can already hear that the reverb that's applied on the group is being applied to the kick drum. I'm going to also find a few more samples that we can play with our drum beat here, and I'll just load them up onto these tracks. I'm also going to delete these extra tracks because we don't need them for this example. I'm going to recolor these so that it's a little bit more organized. And I'm going to move this down here. Let's find a snare sample. Snare. Let's go with this one. So I'll click on the track, use Shift Tab to look into the device view, and I'll drag that sample right into my device view. That's created my simpler device, and now I can hear a snare drum anytime I add a note or when I play the sample. I'll delete some of these extra notes here. So you can hear that the reverb is being applied to both the kick drum and the snare drum at the same time. I'll deactivate this device so we can hear the difference. This is called A-Being, where we're comparing one form of the sound to another form of the sound back to back. So I'm going to use the device activator switch, which is in the top left-hand corner of the device. It's this yellow button here. So what's happening here? The sound that's happening in the snare drum and the kick drum track are being routed to the group channel. You'll notice that in the input and output section, we have some useful information here. So if we're looking closely at the kick track, we can see that the output area is directing the audio to something called drums. Let's look where the drums track is. It's the group. So we can see that the audio from kick is going to the drums track, and then if we look at the output of the drums track, we can see that that audio is going to the master channel. What is a master channel? The master channel is located down here, and this is the last stage of the signal flow before the audio exits your computer and your audio interface and goes to your headphones. So this is basically like a group track, but it applies to all of the sounds that are inside of your Ableton Live session. So you'll notice that when we have some sound playing from the drums group, you'll also see the volume slider on the master track responding to those sounds. The sounds from the snare and the kick, in this case, are being combined together to create a single two-channel audio output. What do I mean by a two-channel audio output? I mean a left and right signal for your left headphone and your right headphone. Alternatively, your right monitor speaker or your left monitor speaker. We're going to talk a lot more about buses and the master output when we get into the portion of this course on mixing and mastering. So what does it look like if we have a track outside of the group? Well, first off, if you'd like to move a track outside of a group, you can grab the track title and drag it outside of the group threshold. You'll notice now that the hat track is outside of that purple bracket that contains all of the drums. And if you look in the input and output section, if we had a sound on here, this is no longer going to the group track. Let me move another track out so that you can see how the routing will automatically change for you. So if we have, let's say we want to take the kick drum out of the drums group, we can grab the title and drag it outside of the group, let go, and then you'll notice that that kick drum track is no longer inside of the purple bracket that contains all of the drum sounds, and the output of the input and output section on that kick track is no longer routed to the drum track first, it's routed to the master channel on its own. Let's compare the snare drum, which is being routed to the drums group, to the kick, which is being routed directly to the master channel. Let's listen to how this changes the sound now that the kick drum isn't being routed through the group that has the reverb on it. You'll notice that now only the snare drum is being affected by the reverb on the drum group. Let's continue working in the arrangement view, but instead of working with MIDI information, let's try to make a drum beat where we're only using audio samples on their own. So what I'm going to do first is create 2 or 3 audio tracks where we're going to manually arrange these audio recordings, these audio clips, into the form of some type of a beat. So I'm going to use my keyboard shortcut for adding a new audio track, and hopefully you remember what it is. It's Command T or Control T on a PC. So we've got our first track here. I'm going to add 2 more. Here we go. The first track, I'm going to name it Kick. So I'm entering rename mode using Command R, typing kick, tab, we'll do snare, tab, and I'm going to do hat. Okay. Now that I've got those 3 tracks on there, I'm going to delete the 3 MIDI tracks from the group because we don't need those anymore. I'm also going to delete that extra audio track, and I'm going to recolor these to white so that it's just a little bit easier to read the names of these tracks. So this time, instead of using Command F to search through my entire browser, I'm going to specifically look in the samples area. This is going to only show me audio samples instead of a combination of audio samples and devices that have the same keyword that I'm searching for. So I've got snare already up there in the search bar, and I'm just going to scroll through some of these snares to find something good. That sounds nice. This snare specifically you can refer to as being a one shot. And the reason why is because it only happens once, whereas some of these other snares are a loop of multiple snares happening. You could almost arrange that clip into your timeline as a loop and have a beat that's already kind of started for you. In this case, I like working in one shots so that we can have full control over what our beat is going to be. So I'm just going to grab this snare drum audio sample and drag it over onto my timeline. You'll notice that it's a very small clip because we're zoomed out quite a bit, but once I've got the kick drum sample and the hat sample, we'll zoom in and get our view looking a little bit nicer. So let's look for a kick sample now. I still want to be on the samples category, so I'm going to just click on that and then adjust the search term to kick. Ooh, that's nice. I'm going to drag the kick drum there, and now we're going to find a hat. I'm specifically going to look for a closed hat. So I'll go hat CL, and we'll see what we've got. That one sounds pretty good. So I'll drag that hat over onto my timeline. Oh, looks like it didn't drop there. There we go. So now we've got the three sounds that we're going to use for our audio drum beat. And I need to correct the view right now. So there are some quick ways that we can do this. In Ableton Live 11, if you create a time selection indicating where you'd like to frame your view, you can press the Z button and it will perfectly arrange your view to show the selection that you've made. Let's say I wanted to zoom in even further. I can create a smaller selection and zoom right in there. If I want to return back to my previous view, I can press the X key on my keyboard. Now keep in mind that if you have this button up here selected, the QWERTY MIDI keyboard button, you will no longer be able to use those keyboard shortcuts for zooming in and zooming out, because now your QWERTY keyboard will be used as a MIDI keyboard piano. So we'll talk about that in a little while when we talk about recording MIDI. So right now I'm just going to turn that off. And right now we're looking at 4 bars, which is the length of the loop that we'd like to make. So I'm going to create a time selection, and I'll use Command L to create a loop brace around those four bars, just so that we can see exactly where we're working, and then we don't have to hit start and pause multiple times in order to return back to the beginning of the loop. So just like the MIDI editor, we can see that we have some subdivisions of time here. We've got, currently this is set to 1/8 notes. You can see down in the bottom right hand corner of the arrangement view that we've got this fraction 1/8. I specifically would like to have the quarter notes grid selected, so I'm going to right click in the grid area and choose quarter notes. Alternatively, I could use the keyboard shortcut Command 1 and 2 to increase and decrease the subdivision count, just the same way that we did this in the MIDI editor. So now that I've got quarter notes set up, I'm going to duplicate this kick drum all the way across so that we're getting a kick drum on every quarter note. Now if I click on the clip handle of this clip and then use the duplicate command, you'll notice that the kick drum is not actually duplicating to the beat time ruler that I have selected, and it's only duplicating in increments based off of the length of the clip, meaning that the clips will be butted up to one another, and this isn't going to vibe with our tempo at all. So what we need to do is integrate some silence into this selection. So what I'll do is create a time selection by clicking and dragging from left to right or right to left, depending on what I'm the most comfortable with. And then I'll press the Command D button, and you'll see that that's going to line up the beginning of that sample with the beginning of each beat. This is exactly what we want to achieve. Here we go. So what I'm going to do now is arrange the snare drum over the length of our 4 bars. So if I just shift the snare drum over, you can see that it'll lock into whatever my beat time ruler setting is right now. But I need to duplicate them. I could create a time selection that is the length of 2 quarter notes and duplicate this way. Alternatively, if I wanted to be a little bit more selective with the location of the clip that I'm copying, I can click on the clip handle to begin dragging, but then add the modifier option on a Mac or Control on a PC, and you'll notice that now we get sort of this silhouette version of the clip itself, and next to the cursor you'll see a little page there with a plus symbol indicating that we're actually copying this clip as we're dragging it. So the important thing here is that you let go of the click before you let go of the modifier key. On a Mac, the modifier, of course, is the Option button. On a PC, it's the Control button. So I'm just going to let go of the click, and now we've duplicated this snare. I can continue to do this all the way across my timeline, and once I've got to the end, then I've created a basic 4 on the floor drum beat. That's quite loud, so I'm going to turn down the volume of these clips. You'll notice that on the right hand side in the volume area in the master channel and in the group channel that the fader is starting to turn red. that VU meter is starting to turn red because it's indicating that the combined volume of these clips is actually overdriving the output of our master channel. This is important to keep an eye out for because it's going to add some unnatural digital artifacts to your sound, and it's going to give you a skewed impression of how your song sounds as you're combining sounds together. We'll talk a lot more about gain staging and things to be aware of while you're mixing sounds together when we talk about mixing and mastering. But as we're working through here, we will want to tidy all of the audio clips up so that we don't run into any big distortion problems. So there are a couple ways we can adjust the volume of each of these tracks. The first is to enter into the audio clip by double-clicking the clip handle, or by clicking on the clip you'd like to access and then using Shift Tab to enter the detail view of that clip. So I'll show you how to do this on one clip, and then we'll apply it to all of the clips. So when you've accessed the detail view of this audio clip, you'll notice that we get the image of the waveform, and then on the left-hand side in the audio box, we get this little gain slider. Now this is a special gain slider because this is actually the very beginning of the gain stage. This is the first opportunity that you get to adjust the volume before the sound travels through the device chain, through the buses, through the track, and through the master channel. This is also the only place that you can turn up and down the volume while also getting visual feedback of the volume of your clip. So I've turned this down, and you'll notice that the waveform has shrunk quite a bit, indicating that the volume has also decreased. But I'd like to keep the volume of these kick drums very consistent. So what I'm going to do is undo my volume change that I've added, and I'm going to select all of these kick drum clips at once. I'm going to do that by clicking on the clip handle of the first of the range, holding Shift, and then I'm just going to click on the clip handle of the last clip in this range. Now you'll notice we don't get the view of the waveform anymore because we have multiple clips selected, but we do get the option to adjust the gain, pitch, and a few other options applied to all of the clips that we have selected. So I'm going to turn the gain down to -6. Now you can either move this slider by just clicking and dragging it up and down, or if you'd like it to move in fine increments, you can click on it and hold Shift while you're moving it up and down. I can also click on the area where the number is located, and I can type the volume that I would like right in there so that I can be really selective with this. So I want it to be at -6, and you'll notice that it'll automatically drop down to -6 exactly. If I've made a mistake and I want to return this parameter to default, you can double click any parameter and it'll return that parameter to its default position. So let's return back to -6, and I'm going to apply the same volume change to these snares. Now, instead of applying a gain change at the beginning of the gain stage by using the gain knob in the audio box, I'm going to use the track volume. On the right-hand side of every track in the mixer section, just like in the session view, you have these track activator switches. They're basically like track mute switches. You also get the solo switch, the track arm switch, and then below that, this is where you have your track volume. These are all set at 0 right now, which is also referred to as unity gain. We're neither adding volume or subtracting volume from the incoming signal. Next to that, we have the pan pot. Right now it's providing us with a letter C, indicating that the signal is currently located in the center of the stereo image. Now if we were to move this up, you would see that we have a number from 0 to 50 R, and then on the other side 50 L. So 50 right, 50 left. And this is actually going to increase or decrease the volume balance between the right speaker and the left speaker. And then I'll show you these last two areas here that are our sends. Our sends, just as a reminder, allow us to send a duplicate of the signal to one of these return tracks. So I'll just close those for now. And what we're looking to do is to turn the snare drum volume down by 6 dB. Now I can click and drag inside of the volume area here down to 6 dB, and just like the other gain slider that we were using, if I need to move in smaller, finer increments, I can hold Shift and that will move slowly for me. Alternatively, I can click inside of this box and press and actually type in the value that I'd like, so -6, and that will apply that volume to this channel. So let's see how this is affecting our signal. If we have a look at this in the session view, we'll notice that the volume slider is going to indicate that right now the volume is set to -6, and when we hit play, you can see that the volume is peaking at -6. We can use this little triangle to move the volume down and up. And you'll see and hear how that's changing the visual feedback and the audible feedback. Just like every parameter, you can double click it and it'll return to its default state. Let's toggle back to the arrangement view and continue working on our audio beat. So we've got the snare drum in here. The volume is a little bit loud, so I'm just going to turn that down to -6. In fact, I'm going to turn this volume down inside of the clip view because it is our preferred way of turning down the volume of the clips that are on our timeline. So I've got the snare drum set, and now I'm going to add the hi-hat in between the kick drum and the snare drum. I'd like to add the hat on every second 8th note. So I'll switch the grid setting to 8th notes, and I'm going to move that hat over to the second 8th note. And just like with the snare and the kick drum, I'll duplicate this across the timeline. You'll notice that it's duplicating the silence as well as the audio clip. Let's have a listen to our drum beat all together now. All right, the hat is a little bit loud, so I'm just going to select all of them, turn the hat down a bit. That's sounding pretty good, but maybe I want to apply a little bit of reverb to the snare drum. So I'm just going to use Command F or Control F on a PC to search in my browser, and I'm going to search for reverb. This is going to show me all of the devices and all of the files in my browser that have reverb in the name. I'll just grab the default hybrid reverb and I'll drag it over onto the snare drum. This is a pretty intense reverb sound, so I'm going to reduce the amount of the effect by using the dry wet knob that's in the bottom right hand corner of the device. We'll go into more detail about all of these devices in context in later sessions, but you will notice that on most of these audio effects, you'll get the ability to adjust the dry wet knob. And what this does is it controls the balance between the fully unaffected signal and the fully affected signal. So you can mix the two together to find the perfect balance between the effect and the clarity of that dry signal, that unaffected signal. So I'm going to turn this down quite a bit, especially since it's a reverb. A really common mistake that new producers make is by applying too much reverb to their sounds, which compounds, and then what you're left with at the end is just a really washy sounding mess. All right, so now that we've been editing some audio in the timeline, I want to show you a little bit more of an advanced tip where you can adjust these sounds in a unique way that you can't actually accomplish using MIDI alone. One thing that you might want to do is reverse some of these samples, which is a pretty fun thing to do, especially with snare drums. So perhaps on every second snare, I want some kind of like a sucking whoop, reversed snare sound to happen. What I'll do is duplicate this snare drum by clicking the clip handle and holding Option while I drag it to the left. And then what I'll do is use the reverse command to reverse this sample. The reverse command is simply pressing R on your keyboard. There we go. So you'll notice that it's reversed that sample. And now I can zoom in by putting my cursor up in the beat time ruler and clicking and dragging down just to get a better view. And I'm going to move this sample so that it butts right up against this snare drum sound. So I'll click it, and I'm going to temporarily suspend the grid setting by holding the Command key on a Mac. On a PC, you can hold the Option key or the Alt key. So I'm just going to move this over and let go my click. Let's have a listen. All right, that sounds pretty cool, but it's pretty loud, so I'm going to turn it down. I'll double click on the clip handle and turn down that gain slider, and then we'll listen to it again. Oh, that sounds pretty cool. So I'd like to have this happen for every second one of these snare drums. So instead of just duplicating this reverse and then zooming in and adjusting it that way, I'm actually going to look at these time subdivisions from a distance. And you'll notice that the colors of the grid change between darker and lighter to indicate even subdivisions. And this is really useful to me because if I were to grab, say, from beat 1 to beat 2 and duplicate this all the way across using Command D or Control D on a PC, you'll see it will overwrite the current notes that I have, the current clips that I have on that track, and apply that reversed snare. So let's have a listen to this now. So now that we have this audio drum beat here, we might want to make it a little bit easier to manage by consolidating some of these audio files. But there are a couple things to be aware of when you're consolidating audio and when you're editing audio. For example, when we zoom in on one of these clips, you'll notice that on the beginning and ending of this clip, we have a small fade that's being applied. It prevents the audio from creating audible clicks. Now, it's kind of subtle if you're not listening for it, but it sounds like some sort of a CD skip or some kind of digital error. And these are the types of things that we really want to avoid. And that's why by default, Ableton Live will apply a small fade at the beginning and end of every audio clip that you add to your timeline. But the reason this can become a bit of a problem is when you're using a kick drum or a snare drum sample that has been edited in a way so that the attack is right next to the beginning of the clip edge. You'll notice that a lot of the attack portion of the kick, which is the snappy portion of that kick drum, is actually being faded down in volume. So we're not actually hearing the kick drum the same way that we heard it when we were listening to it from the browser. So to fix this, we can zoom in and adjust the fade edge of that clip so that we can actually hear and we can see more of that beginning of the kick, that attack of the kick. So the closer you zoom in, the more information you're going to be able to see, but you'll notice that as you're moving that fade edge, it's going to give you some visual feedback to let you know if you're actually increasing or decreasing the volume of the waveform. So the fade doesn't need to be really long, but there does need to be some type of a fade there just so that it will prevent a little bit of an audio click. This is only really important for the beginning of the clip in most cases, so we won't adjust the end fade. We'll just adjust the beginning of the clip. Let's hear the difference here. So I'm going to play this kick drum on its own, and you can hear the difference between a kick drum that's been faded and a kick drum that hasn't been faded. So maybe I'll adjust that loop. So the first one that I'm going to indicate in green is with the fade removed, and then the next one is with the fade currently engaged. So here we go. Notice how the second kick sounds a little bit more muted, kind of dead. It sounds muffled almost. It really extremely changes the character of the sound. So we want to be aware of this as we're working through our project so that you're not confused as to why you've added this amazing sound and for some reason it's not sounding quite as how you had imagined. So now that I've adjusted that clip edge on this green clip to be quite a bit shorter, I'm just going to duplicate this kick drum all the way across. That's going to save me some time, and then I don't have to go in and manually adjust every one of those clip edges. Let's do the same thing with this snare drum. Now you'll notice that when we zoom in on these two snare drums that the clip fade is actually a little bit different. What we're seeing here is actually a crossfade, where we're crossfading between the end of the first snare and the beginning of the next snare. And we have a little bit more control over how we can apply that fade. We can either use the little node that's on the top of that X to adjust the length of the crossfade, or we can adjust the center node to change how quickly the first track exits and the last track enters. So I'm just going to add that small clip fade there. You can see it's pretty short, and I've deactivated the crossfade. There we go. And so these are currently looking good, so I'm going to put those in green as well. And I'm going to duplicate this all the way across. Cool. I'm not going to do that for the hat because I think the hat sounds pretty good, but what I will show you now is how you can consolidate all of these audio clips so that it's a more manageable piece of audio. Starting with the kick drum, I'm just going to create a time selection that's the entire length of my 4 bars. And just like consolidating MIDI clips, I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Command J. Command J for join when you're using a Mac, or Control J for join if you're using the PC. So I'm going to do the same thing for the snare drum and the hat by creating a time selection, but I'm going to create a time selection between the 2 tracks. This is going to allow me to join both of those clips together at the same time. All right, so now that we have all of these sorted out here, it's going to make it a lot easier to move these around because they'll move in large chunks. If I want to move all 3 of these clips at the same time, I can create a multi-selection by holding Shift while I click the beginning and end of a range. So now I can move these left and right, or I can duplicate them using the duplicate command, or I can cut them, I can paste them. All of the same editing functions that you would use in the MIDI editor or on the arrangement view will apply to these clips as well. Now that you know how to manipulate audio in the arrangement timeline, I encourage you to create another beat using audio samples alone. In the next video, we'll talk about using a reference track to specify instrument arrangement and song structure so that we can begin planning to create our own song in that genre of your choice.